So,
How does it extract water?
how does it extract water? Well, we drill a hole, put down a tube, and at the bottom of the tube we put a pump. And the pump simply pumps the water out. And the water then slowly percolates into the well. And the amount of water that you pump out is, of course, proportional to how much water is coming in. This well right here, we have a lot of problems with, to be honest, and that's because I pointed out that we have these volcanic rocks. They gave off hydrothermal fluids which altered the rocks around them and whatnot. And you'll see these rust-colored rocks, particularly down at Point Vicente, which are exposed there in the road cut. Well, that material, when it gets moved by the groundwater, it tends to plug up our pumps pretty badly. So in areas where we have a lot of hydrothermal activity, the groundwater extraction is much more of a challenge than it is outwater. Yes?
How long have they had the wells?
We started drilling the wells in 1980, 79 and 80. Yeah, the Abalone Cove landslide reactivated, started to move in the late 70s, mid-late 70s. And so very shortly thereafter, around 1979, they drilled the first of the dewatering wells.
And is there any reason why that water can't be reclaimed?
It turns out it's not potable. It does not meet standards. It has a lot of sulfur in it, has too much iron in it, and it has also a lot of particulates in it. So you could make it potable, but the cost of doing that rivals the cost of just, buying it out of a pipe. So, excuse me?
How deep?
How deep are the wells? This one here is about 90 feet. We have wells which are farther up into landslide. We just re-drilled one at 350 feet. So they range from around 100 to as much as 350.
Sliding doesn't ruin your casings?
Well, that's the trick, isn't it? You see, you try to extract enough water to keep it stable so it doesn't move, so it doesn't shear off your wells. The problem over in Portuguese Bend was they couldn't keep the wells operating long enough to slow it down enough, and so it just kept shearing the wells off. Yes?
Are there any disadvantages to the well?
Is there any disadvantages?
Yeah.
I don't think so. Big advantage to us, but I don't think there's any disadvantage. The disadvantage perhaps is you have to maintain them. That costs money and takes time and all that sort of thing. Yeah. Any other questions? Good, well, here we go. By John Vanderlip in the 1920s. The Vanderlip family at the time owned an extensive part of the peninsula, and they had plans that they were going to create these communities, these Mediterranean-style communities, the first of which was Palos Verdes Estate. And that's about as far as it got because the Great Depression came along and financial woes stopped the whole thing. Here, they built the gatehouse, and there are two other houses up the hill from it. They're all built in this Italian ranch style, not ranch style, what do they call it? Farmhouse style and Tuscan ranch house style. And so they still here. The gatehouse here has been essentially restored. It's currently owned by Dan Pinkham, who is one of the well-known local artists here. And Dan and his friends, for example, did the paint job, which originally matches the original paint job that was on the building and whatnot. Interestingly enough, they are sitting just on top of the edge of the landslide. The landslide goes somewhere about through the driveway, then comes across through these houses. I am frankly amazed myself, except for the distress to the houses which took place largely in the late 1970s, early 1980s. There's not very much movement going on. And so it's partly a tribute to wood frame houses. They really are forgiving and they able to accommodate actually quite well. So anyway, we'll move on along and then we're going to start at the westernmost edge of the Portuguese Bend landslide. And it's fairly obvious, I think. it crosses the road here. This, on the other side here, this block, if you can imagine, is going down. It's also moving towards the ocean. And so this creates what is locally known here as the ski jump. And as you can see, from time to time, the unsuspected get caught by it, and so you can really hear them thump as they go down the other side. So this, the landslide comes through here. It's coming right along this face here, and then it's going down to the beach. And we'll actually be able to see the bottom of the landslide that's exposed at the intertidal zone as we go down to the beach. As it has progressed, this block here has been going down, is causing big chunks of this hillside here to fall off. And so this one, which right immediately in front of us, was up there not so terribly long ago, and it's slowly cascading off and down onto the beach. Over across the way there, you can see all of those culverts, which the city put in a few years ago. And the idea was to catch the water and drain it down to the ocean so it wouldn't run down the landslide. But time has overtaken it, and as you can see, most of the culvert now is above the deepest depression over there. So that forms a lake right now, and none of the water goes into the culvert. And the result is that cliff right there is actually the head of a smaller block within the landslide, and so that water is just running right down that block, which is helping to activate the movement. So the movement here is pretty fast. Right behind us, that block is not moving. So the basalts, which you can see better now, the white band is the top of the basalts over there. And the basalts, as you can see, they're tipping towards the ocean. They come up here and then go back across the road. This block in here is actually quite stable. It's not moving at all. So on each side of it, you've got these landslides, and they're moving things along. Behind you, you can see the hillside, and there are a number of things. One is you can see a very large block has fallen off the hill, sliding down the hill. That's really the edge of the Portuguese Bend landslide as it comes across the road and goes down towards the ocean. We're standing on one of the blocks, the western blocks of the Portuguese Bend landslide. As you move to your right, you'll see that there is dark material up there at the very crest of the hill where the pine tree is and whatnot. Actually, that's basalt, and it's very deeply weathered there. And it represents the toe of the landslide that I was talking to you about earlier. That's the very toe, and at that point, that hill where the pine tree and all are located is the very toe of the ancient landslide where it has overridden the flat terrace. And if you move farther to your right, you can begin to see in this small gully here these beds, which are turned up and are almost vertical, and then they get truncated, and that's the top of the old terrace, and the landslide material is sitting on top of it. Now, why are these beds suddenly turned up and become almost vertical? The general belief is that this represents where the landslide hit this block and literally pushed these beds up and distorted them. So as we go farther to our right, you can see again the basalts at the base of which there's this white layer. The white layer is largely dolomite, and that's the layer of basalt immediately above it, which goes clear out and makes up most of the point, which right now is in shadow and you can't see too well, but we'll go down there and take a look at it in just a minute. Well, we made it down to the beach, and what we're going to do now is, behind me is the toe of the Portuguese Bend landslide, and we're going to walk down here and take a look at a few features which are in the toe of the landslide, and also we can see the very base of the landslide where the bentonites are exposed. Behind me you can see some of the materials which make up the base of the landslide. You'll notice that it's light gray and yellowish colored. This material has been altered by hydrothermal fluids which came off of the basaltic intrusions that we talked about earlier. This material has basically been reduced to clay. The yellow in it is exposed here is mostly reduced iron that gives it that color, but also in this material there is a lot of sulfur, and sometimes it develops right at the surface, and so this material in here contains a lot of sulfur. If you'll take a piece of that, breathe on it deeply, you can actually smell the sulfur smell that goes with it. This material has been highly altered, has very little in the way of structural integrity. That is, it's not very strong. It easily comes apart. As you look up the sea cliff here, you can see it's just made up of a jumble of boulders and pieces of material, all of which have been more or less ground up. There's no really large blocks in here, and this is fairly typical of the lower part of the landslide. We'll walk over here and we'll take a look at the bentonites, which are actually at the bottom. This material here, which doesn't look very exciting, turns out to be largely bentonite. It's very soft, clay-like material, and you notice it has these large white pieces in it. Turns out this originally was volcanic ash, which fell, settled on the sea floor, accumulated as a layer, and then over time was altered. The white particles here actually originally were pieces of pumice, and they have all been altered. And so it's the clay which makes up the very base of the landslide. This actually is part of the Portuguese tuffs that is mostly been turned into bentonitic clays and whatnot. If you look around the base of the landslide, again you can find boulders and pieces of material which have been all ground up and are displaced and whatnot. The rocks on the beach here are from major storms, which is fairly obvious is rapidly eroding away this material because it's very soft. So whenever there are major storms and the waves bash against the sea cliff, it erodes away, and what gets left behind then are the boulders. And so this giant pile of boulders here has been derived from erosion of the sea cliff. We'll go over here one more time. A moment ago I mentioned that there are no really large blocks left in the landslide. Here's a bit of an exception. Behind me is a very large piece of the basalt. If you look along the edges of it, you can see it's been altered, but it's pretty much intact. It's deeply weathered, and there are a series of zones, contact zones, between the basalts, which are up here. This is some of the sediments in here which have been altered. Here's some more here. If you look at it carefully, you can see minerals and stuff in it. And then down here you get this very black, very hard material, which really is a contact material. It's sediments which was essentially baked at the time in which the basalts were intruded. Right now we're going to walk along the beach and over to the point and take a look at the basalts and some of the features which are associated with this very large basaltic intrusion, which is called a sill because it basically is parallel to the sedimentary bed. So we'll walk over there and take a look at it now. At low tide you can see the sedimentary sequence exposed. You'll notice here it's made up of a series of fairly thinly bedded rocks, and they are, as we say, dipping off towards the ocean. The dip here is at a low angle. It's about maybe 12 degrees, something like that. These are the sediments which are underneath the basalt, and they are exposed here. They're exposed also over in Abalone Cove, but as we walk closer to the point, they get covered by beach rubble and whatnot, and you can't see them again. We can't on this side of the cove, that is this side of the point I should say, we can't see the contact, the lower contact very well between the basalts and the sediments. It is exposed, however, pretty well over on the Abalone Cove side. So let's walk along the beach here and we'll walk up and take a look at the basalts and some of the features that we can see in the basalts. We're standing on one of the